each of our guests, if you don't mind holding the microphone, maybe for those who have gray hair who might not hear as well, it might help us. I'm talking about me, primarily. So, Secretary Wilkie, America's military readiness. Are we ready to do all the things that we have to do, that we need to do in the world today?
No. Look, let me start with a different answer to the question. I can make the argument that we face a world that is more complicated and more dangerous than it was when we were confronting the sclerotic Soviet Union. There's a 3.5-headed monster out there, half if you include little Kim in Pyongyang. They tell us every day that they want to get rid of us. And Golda Meir had the perfect response to that. She used to say, if someone tells you over and over again, he wants to kill you, believe him. We have a bestial leader in Russia who is waging war right out of the dark ages on the people of Ukraine. We have the mullahs who tell us that Israel is a one-bomb solution, but at the center is the People's Republic of China. That is the lodestar. That is what connects the problems of the world, as much as they feign ignorance. One of the reasons, among many, that getting rid of the mullahs is so important is that it gets rid of China's foothold in the Middle East. It refutes Xi's line that he's been giving his people for such a long time that the United States is no longer declining, the United States is dead, because his dreams in Iran, for the most part, were evaporated in about half an hour when the attack started. So that's the world we face. It is much more to this. There's much more to this than just a simple war game, looking at the battle space. That's a prescription for disaster, because in this world we need to take cognizance of our logistics capability, our ability to regenerate forces, and more importantly, the morale. The moral is to the military is 3:1, Napoleon said. We have to keep our people enthused about our history so that they believe that there is something to fight for. Now, real quick, because the general has much more to say on this than I. We have 10 shipyards. Chinese have 110. We are not doing the things that we need to do in terms of producing artillery shells, tanks, rifles. One thing that Putin has reminded us, he's reminded us that the peer-on-peer lessons of the 20th century are still with us, the force-on-force lessons. But he's also shown us that a little country with no navy can sink a surface navy. And a little country with no strategic bombing force can wipe out 1/3 of the strategic bombing force of the much larger power. So we have to innovate. We have to restore the manufacturing ability that we had, the ability that laid low the Nazis, actually the Kaiser, the Nazis, and also the Soviet Union. So we have a lot of work to do. But we are not ready for the long haul. We have the smallest Navy since 1936. We have the oldest Air Force since Harry Truman created the service in 1947. There are 2,500 planes on the rolls of the United States Air Force, the last of which came online in the first 3 months of the Kennedy administration. And I'm not talking about the administration at Health and Human Services under this Kennedy. So a lot to do. The good thing is Americans know how to do it.
So, General Amos, from Secretary Wilkie, I'm hearing that we have a capacity issue. Yes?
We do, and I think you can take a look at what's just happened in the last 6 months between what happened down in the Caribbean as when Trump turned his attention on the drugs coming across in those small boats. That's true, and it's real, and they were being dropped off in on the small islands just to the west of, east of Cuba. So that was all real and that was all valid. But then Venezuela and Maduro has shown the world that socialism really works really well, along with Cuba. And yet we have protesters here for the May Day parade espousing socialism across our country, mostly out of Chicago, mostly out of New York. But what's happened now is, if you took a look at, think about what went down in the Caribbean. There's a carrier battle group down there, there was a Marine Amphibious Ready group down there, and there were airplanes flying out of Puerto Rico, airplanes flying out of Miami and places in the Gulf. And you saw what happened down there. It was a huge force. In the meantime, things are brewing over in the Straits of Hormuz and with Iran and our Arab partners over there in the Gulf states. And so now we end up with 3 carrier battle groups, 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, all the support ships, the submarines, and everything else. And that's just the Navy and Marine Corps. Think about all the Air Force and the Army forces. The 82nd Airborne rolled out at the same time that we sent the last Marine Expeditionary Unit. So we have a lot of forces there. And I'll tell you what, that's a tough fight. It would appear easy to begin with, but when you think about that regime that's been there as long as it has, and the amount of people that are in support, almost 900,000 people in support to keep the regime in place. That's the rough estimate. That's a lot of people just to protect the mullahs and the people there that want to turn Iran into that Republic of Iran, or Islamic Republic of Iran. And they want to spread that across the Gulf. So there's a lot of reason why it's been difficult. It was easy to begin with. We know how to do that. I know how to do that, and we've done it before. But we've had 47 years of cave digging, underground tunnels digging, missiles being imported in there, drones being imported in there, all kinds of capabilities that are underground. So this is going to take just a little bit longer. And I'd like to say that my personal opinion, where we are today with the blockade, I think it's brilliant. There may be a few other things that have to take place, but I like the idea of starving Iran. I like the idea of shutting off their oil capacity to be able to export it. They now have got all their tanks overflowing. They can't produce, they can't store what they're producing now, and they can't sell what they're producing now. And so the figures you see every day is $400 million a day, and whatever it is close to that. But eventually, they're going to run out of money, and I suspect they're very close to being able to pay the 200,000 Iranian Republican Guard forces, the 90,000 special forces, the security forces. They're going to run out of money. They don't have any money to be able to pay them. And when that happens, and by the way, the people in town, Iran's got a 80 million people population, roughly, give or take. There's 70 million that actually don't care about the Iranian Republican regime. They don't care about that at all. They just want to have a good life. It's 10 million people that are fully in support of the regime. So you think about all those forces that are there, the forces that still remain in the Caribbean. And I'll tell you, we're just about maxed out. So back to the issue of capacity and military readiness. We're at a point now where there's recognition about we're not building ships fast enough. I worked for the president of English Shipbuilding for 10 years after I retired. And Amos builds 100% of the nuclear carriers, half the submarines, 100% of the amphibious warships, 100% of the Coast Guard cutters, and a big chunk of the frigates. And that's two big, massive shipyards. But we don't have enough. We don't have enough capacity. Bonnie and I were just up in Groton, Connecticut 2 weeks ago, commissioned the latest fast attack submarine, the USS Idaho. It's a big deal, but we've got somewhere between 290 and 300 ships in the Navy. And as Secretary Wilkie said, that's the smallest number we've ever had in a long, long time. So with this administration, this isn't a paid political announcement for this, but there is recognition that we need greater shipyard capacity, and we need trained shipyard artisans, and we're bringing in South Korea, which actually has a lot of shipyard capacity capability, to reopen up some of our old shipyards. And there's recognition by our president that we need to build more ships if we're going to be the force in readiness that we want to be, because we are at capacity right now, from my perspective, both in the Caribbean and in the Gulf.
Let me just add to what the Commandant said about the situation on the ground in Iran. They have about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks left of reserves in their treasury. When that dries up, then you will begin to see, as the Commandant laid out, the separation of the true believers from the fellow travelers, because you will not be able to pay either one. And if you remember, a couple of months ago, when the real hit 1.2 million to the dollar, the people took to the streets. Now, just to tell you, give you an idea of the brutality of this regime, in the month of January, 45,000 of those protesters were killed. Now, put that in perspective. That's more than the United States and the United Kingdom and Canada and Australia lost during the entire Korean War in 1 month. That's what we are dealing with. But the blockade is important. I would add that I think that taking control of Karg Island and several of the islands would, in the Gulf, which the 82nd has task orders to do, has had those since the 1980s, the Marine Corps as well. I think that would hasten the internal collapse of the regime. But that said, logistics. And we have to concentrate on that, particularly for the Navy and the Air Force. A fight with China will be on the water, under the water, and in the air. We're not going to drop the 82nd Airborne Division on Taiwan. And that is where the fight will be. I will also add, and I said this in a speech actually in London a couple of weeks ago, we have an incredible advantage in terms of our experiences, the professionalism of our forces. You can't count anything in China as being combat ready unless, of course, you count as combat experience killing your own people, which is what they're very good at in the People's Republic. But there will be a point where quantity will overwhelm quality. And that's the point where we have to stay on.
Let me ask you just real briefly, how much longer do you think Iran can last?
I think Secretary is alluded to it. I would give them no more than 60 days, and I think you'll see people in the streets. The people in the streets that came out in January and February, and the 45,000 that were killed or were severely wounded, that's a fact. The problem with the people in the streets is that's the 70 million other people that actually are educated. Iran has a pretty good economy, and Iran has a very high rate of education, probably the highest rate of education than any of the other Arab countries or states that are over there. The people are actually good people, but they have no weapons. And so you've got this almost 800,000 IRGC, their security forces, the Quds forces, which are the highly trained elite forces of the, and they're also the ones that go out in the world and do terrorist attacks and do assassinations, both in this country and other countries around the world. They're also the ones that go into Syria, Lebanon, Iran, down in Yemen and train those forces, and in Gaza, train those forces with military tactics to provide weapons. So that's the Quds force. So those folks, it's yet to be seen how this is going to play out. Obviously, the number 70 million versus 10 million, you'd say, well, I can figure that out. very difficult to do when you have no weapons. So we'll have to wait and see. I'd say I'd give them about another 60 days. I think we need to be patient as a country. You know, when our president came on several months ago and said, I'm gonna drop every bridge, I'm gonna take every power station out, and I'm gonna obliterate this place and take it off the face of it. That's not helpful, to be honest with you. That's not what we need. We don't need to take their power stations out. We don't need to drop their bridges. We need to starve them out. This last thing I would say on this thing is, you need to stay tuned on this matter of the uranium, the processed uranium, because that is a key thing with regards to any negotiations that go forward. We cannot, and so far President Trump is staying the course, we cannot allow 900 plus thousand pounds of enriched uranium to remain in that country, because they're going to make a bomb. I've got quotes in my phone of what they said they were going to do to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They've been saying that since the regime took command of Iran. So there's no doubt what they're going to do with it. And I heard President Trump saying this morning on the news while I was up early, and he was saying if they get it, it's going to be in Israel, then it's going to be in Europe, and then eventually it's going to be in the United States. It's just the kind of people they are. So we need to pay attention to that. That needs to be a hard line for any negotiations, and I believe our president is probably headed that direction.
The day of the attack, the second attack, there were 5 Chinese ships off of Carb and loading ballistic missile components as quickly as they could. And just to tell you, the Commandant mentioned the network. One of the reasons it was so important to take Maduro out is that Maduro was funneling Hezbollah and Iranian killers through Venezuela, giving them diplomatic immunity, giving them passports to spread throughout the world. It spread into the West. I did a show with the Swedish defense minister. Within 2 weeks of this latest round of fighting, Swedish intelligence had uncovered just in Sweden 11 Iranian-backed efforts to kill Swedish leaders, to kill Jews in Stockholm. So that tells you how this is tied together. And when the Shah fell, we knew the Shah was going when the security forces stopped firing on the people in the street. That's one thing to look for. And the collapse of the economy will come, and General Amos is absolutely right. You don't give the people an excuse to oppose your efforts to get rid of the people who are oppressing them. And that's where rhetoric is very important in these fights.
We could talk all hour probably about Iran and the Middle East, unless we move on to a couple other things. Let's talk NATO and Europe. Robert, does it concern you that the Trump administration wants to draw down our troops in Germany more than the 5,000 they've already talked about?
Well, I'm not so much worried about troops in Germany as long as they move east. In the first Trump administration, when I worked for General Nance as Undersecretary for Readiness, we had plans to move them out of Germany and put them closer to Russia, in Poland, in the Baltics. Look, NATO is important. You all know it's the most successful alliance in history. We need to stay tethered in Europe simply for our own self-interest. You're talking about 32 countries that have a GDP that's 1.5 times our size. Culturally, they're with us, particularly in Eastern Europe. When I talk about Eastern Europe, I include Sweden and Finland, through the Baltics all the way down to Greece. These people are spending 5% of their GDP or more on defense. Most of them have lived under both the jackboot and the hammer and sickle. They know they are friends of the United States. It's the Western half that has stopped believing in itself, stopped believing in that civilizational continuum that began when Abraham stepped out of his tent and then moved from Jerusalem to Athens to Rome to London and then to the American Colossus. Give you an example, the United Kingdom, the mighty Royal Navy, once the scourge of the seas, 10 destroyers in the Royal Navy. 9 of them are laid up for maintenance and lack of crews. The one they tried to get out of Scotland to protect their RAF base in Cyprus, it got out of port. 2 hours, it was back in the other direction because it was springing leaks. The British Army, a battle record unsurpassed in the history of Western civilization. There are only enough soldiers in the British Army to fill the lower sections of the Wembley National Stadium in London. There are more active duty troops at Fort Bragg than the entire British Army. I could say the same thing for France, for Germany. The Bundeswehr is an olive drab Meals on Wheels program. In Canada, I was born, 4th largest army in NATO. Today, it is the size of the Alabama National Guard and less effective. So when President Trump demands more of Europe, he's in a long line that began with President Eisenhower. Eisenhower always said, if we're still running the European show in 10 years, we've failed. So it's incumbent on them. The wolf, the bear is at the doorstep. The Ukrainians have shown the way forward. It's up for Europe to act.
Jim, let me ask, do you have something about that? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. As Commandant of the Marine Corps, you were part of the 7-member Joint Chiefs of Staff. Could you describe the relationship and the role that JC has? I think this group would love to hear what you have to say.
Sure, thank you. You know, this is something I've enjoyed since I left active duty, was to be able to talk about the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because to some degree, it's a mystery. You hear that term JCS, you see General Kane on TV, who, by the way, I think is doing a remarkable job. And I've never met him. He kind of came out of, as you recall, I think he was a retired 3-star, spent a lot of time in special ops from the Air Force. And he had briefed General or President Trump sometime during the first Trump administration. And he went, okay, I remember this guy, and he brought him up. So I think he's doing a remarkable job. He was brought up as a 3-star out of retirement. So that's my first point. But I'll tell you what, as our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and as members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what I'd like to do is give you enough confidence that you can sleep well on a Saturday night when things are going on in the Hormuz Gulf or Gulf of the Arabian Gulf and the Hormuz Straits and all that stuff. Here's how it works. There are 8 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You've got the chairman, who's a 4-star. You've got a vice chairman, who's a 4-star, so they're at the head of it. And then you've got the Chief of the Air Force, Chief of the Army, Chief of Naval Operations, Commandant of the Marine Corps. And then while I was there, they brought in the Chief of the National Guard. Congress made the Chief of the National Guard and then when President Trump stood up the Space Command, then that became the 8th member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's the makeup. We would meet about twice a week. In fact, we'd meet every week, twice for sure. And then when things were hot around the country, whether it be on the weekend or whether it be late at night, we would meet in this mystical place called the Tank. And it goes back to World War II, and it was in the basement of the Pentagon. And they called it the Tank because it was like boilers and pipes. And it was the only place that they could have a private discussion. Well, now it's a very high-speed, very technologically advanced room that we meet to discuss the issues that are going on. The chairman of the staff is the principal advisor to the President of the United States and to the Secretary of Defense. That's his role. The chiefs, depending on who the president is, has a lot of access with the president or just minimal access. Under President Obama, it was I would call it minimal access, but our chairman, Marty Dempsey, who is a national treasure, Marty was represented all our views when he was up there every single day of the week with President Obama and his staff.
And you were there what years?
I was there for 2 years as the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. So that made me kind of a pretend member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Because when the Commandant was gone, which was often, then I was in there. So I learned during my first 2 years how this all worked and what our responsibilities were. And then the last 4 years, I was a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it was all under President Obama. So a couple of thoughts on this thing. We have access to 100% of all the forces around the world. On widescreen TV, any time of the day and night. We know exactly what's going on around the world. So there's no surprise, excuse me, I'm gonna go with water. There's no surprise with when General Kane is talking to the President and the Joint Chiefs are gathering together. There's no surprise in anything that's happening. The Joint Chiefs are aware of it. Now, we don't always agree with the President, and but we have an opportunity to state our opinion and talk to him about it. And I'll tell you, Obama would listen. And here's the point I'd like to make. I'd like to go back to our country. The military is run by civilian control. The President is the Commander-in-Chief. And I want you to understand that. I want you to believe it. Because last night I got asked a question at dinner. What happens if the implication was, what happens if you get an order that you don't like? Well, we've had lots of orders we don't like. But that's the way it works in our country. The President is the Commander-in-Chief. So in those 6 years, here's what I want you to believe this. In those 6 years, in that closed, sequestered room called the tank, and it was just us. Nothing's recorded. Nothing goes out of that room that's not supposed to go out. And all the discussions we had, I never knew who was a Republican. I never knew who was a Democrat or an independent. We never, one time in 6 years, talked politics. Not once. Now, there were issues. We were told we were going to go do this, and there was a lot of social engineering changes that were taking place in the military in the Obama administration, but we would talk about that. But it wasn't a political discussion. It was a matter of, okay, what's going to happen to my service? How do you implement this thing? And is this good or bad? And what kind of advice should we give the President? It was never a Republican or a Democratic conversation. And I'll tell you what, I think back on that, and I'm very proud of that. I'm thinking about all the things we went through, and the discussions we had, the topics we covered. And there was never 1 ounce of, we're not going to do this. We don't believe in him. It's whatever your political persuasion was, you kept to yourself, and it's sacred ground in there. So I just want you to know that that small group of senior leaders who have got close to probably 1,000 years of experience in combat and leadership are some of the finest members of our military society that I've ever met and I served with. And it's all apolitical, and they're taking very good care of our country. They understand the issues, and they're awake 24/7.
You want to give us some insight into a cabinet meeting as the secretary?
Should I tell them how I joined the cabinet?
Tell us, yeah.
I was very happy. I'm the only person who had been in the cabinet. My first speech was back at the Pentagon within a week, in that massive auditorium, and my first line was, "You will never hear this sentence again in the rest of your life." I'm actually glad to be back at the Pentagon. And no, I was very happy. I was working for General Mattis as Undersecretary for Readiness, and I was summoned into his office and was told that they were going to cashier the VA Secretary. And my first response is, what does that have to do with me? They're going to cashier and you're it. So I asked when do they do this? I said, 4 days, 4 weeks, I don't know. I said, okay, I'll be ready. Got back to my desk, and a great friend, John Kelly, General John Kelly, was on the phone. He said the same thing, 4 days, 4 weeks. I said, I don't think so, John. So what are you talking about? I said, I'm reading the scroll at the bottom of the newscast. And it says, according to latest presidential tweet, the Undersecretary of Defense, Robert Wilkie, will become the acting secretary. Well, 8 weeks after that, I told Commandant that I was invited to a conference on prison reform, the East River. I know as much about prison reform as that class. And the president came in, went down the line. General Sessions is here, Secretary Zinke is here, Dr. Carson's here, Secretary Wilkie's here. We haven't told him he's permanent. John Kelly was in the back of the room underneath the magnificent John Singer Sargent portrait of Theodore Roosevelt, looking at me and mouthing. We didn't see that. He mouthed, "I'm so sorry." Look, let's just, it is, you are awestruck to walk into that room. The way they arrange it is according to the year that the department became part of the cabinet. And you would think VA had been there because it was the product of the second inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln, but it didn't become a cabinet department until Ronald Reagan. So I was at the end of the table underneath the massive portrait of Blessed Harry Truman, who was my hero and was Senator Helms's hero as well. And of course I would look up at him at every meeting and say, "What must you be thinking?" My wife asked him what his response was, and I can never. But no, it was a stunning responsibility, sublime responsibility. And I used to say this about working for Senator Helms and walking into Capitol every day, that if you're not struck by the gravity of just the building itself, then you're in the wrong business. But the first time I realized that this was more serious than anything you read in the history books, I was the designated survivor at one of the State of the Union addresses. And thank goodness I didn't have to sit there and jump up. And I won't get into all the details, but they take you somewhere and they run exercises in the event something happened. And they shuffled me, you've seen it obviously, they shuffled me into a little room, and right behind me was not just the flag of the United States of America, but the next one was the flag of the President of the United States. And that was the exercise that we were running. So you have history cascading down on you every minute. And to walk in and look at a seat that had been occupied by Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, Teddy Roosevelt himself. It was the greatest honor of my life, and I've been blessed to work for great people. But that.
We're past our 1:30 time. Are there any questions from the audience? If we just have quick answers, all right, maybe one or two.
Just a two-part. Why are we dropping guns for these people on our own? To supply them?
Why aren't we?
Or are we? And the other thing is too, we're going to keep the warthog there, right? After X forms, it's close to war.
Okay, your second question, I need to give you a little bit of history on it. The Warthog's the A-10, so we get a new chief of the Air Force, who becomes a dear friend of mine. And the first thing is, okay, I'm going to get rid of the Warthog, the A-10. And his name was Mark Welch. He's brilliant. He's a super guy. And the Warthog had kind of, it outlived its use. And it doesn't mean there's not a use somewhere, but it's a function of you got to pay for it. And I'll also have to have to buy the F-35 and all this other stuff. So he puts it forward. He's going to cancel the program. I've never seen Congress. I've never seen the chief of staff of any service get obliterated as much as Mark was. So the A-10 to this day, I'm watching it on TV like you are, And the A-10 is not as alive and well as far as I know, and it's probably going to continue to be alive and well. I don't know whether there was some talk early on in January, February, that we were putting weapons in behind the lines, so to speak, into Iran. I don't know anything about that. Do you?
Well, there was talk about supplying the Kurds.
Yeah,
and-
that's right.
And that didn't happen. The question I have, if we do that, is where do we put it? Until the rest of Iran's capability to terrorize and butcher its own people has been reduced. I mean, that would be a major logistical effort, and you just don't know where to put it right now.
All right? Okay.
Yeah. How does the Pentagon process all the intelligence data that comes in from all over the world on a 24-hour, 24-hour turnover? How do you process all that information to make short-term tactical and long-term strategic decisions on the use of our military forces?
So it is amazing. If you think about 20 years ago, when we weren't as computerized and we didn't have that kind of cyber capability that we have today, and yet it all came in. It came in a paper. It came in but in that building, God bless them, there are folks in there 24/7 that are brilliant. They're the finest intelligence people from all the services, and they're gathering this together. They did it 20, 30, 40 years ago. Today they've got computer programs, and now we've got AI that's come in from organizations like Palantir and some of these others who've got capabilities. And so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, people are in that building collecting all this stuff. And there are key things that they're looking for. Lesser included intelligence, it's not going to fall by the wayside, but it'll go to somebody that will process that. But there's a capability to render this all down. So when the chairman comes in on a Saturday morning, or he's going to get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning, he's getting the beef. I mean, it is the stuff that you would expect the chairman to know about. And that same information, by the way, is going over to the White House in the Situation Room. So there is a capability to do that. I agree with you completely. There's so much going on around the world. And you can imagine this flood of intelligence that comes in. But the capability is there, and the geniuses that are working in that building faithfully have the ability to be able to render it down into the beefy part of it. So.
I'll add to that, Wayne, being an Air Force intelligence officer for almost 30 years. The key isn't so much the amount of information, it's being able to have an intellectual, educational base to decipher through and determine what's important. So what do I mean by that? Look at all of the predictions that took place in the days prior to Putin launching his invasion of Ukraine. Intelligence came in on position, weapons types, numbers of troops. What did not happen in the analysis is that no one took into consideration the corruption that was endemic in the Russian army. The fact that they do not have an NCO corps such as the Marine Corps has, and most of the Army has, who could take the fight independently, could think on their feet. Initiative is put in place, training for to use initiative, or a junior officer corps that was trained with the troops, and you see what happens in the end. I mean, we've had a lot of intelligence failures that were based on not understanding the history and the culture of the opponent. And I think we saw a lot of that with Russia. We're seeing a lot of that right now with China. As I mentioned almost offhandedly, these are people whose military experience comes from killing their own people. I mean, that's the last war they fought was against Vietnam, and they had their head handed to them against a very much smaller country. So those are the kinds of things that we need to do, because there's one thing of being a great power on paper. But there's another thing, being a full spectrum power, the British Empire. Because it not only had the ships and the troops, it had London, the financial capital of the world. The United States is the other full spectrum power in modernism. Troops, base, logistics base, industrial base, finance, and strong alliances. Look at China. I mentioned the shipyards. Well, the problem is, the other part of that is China has no allies other than Vladimir the Impaler and then the mullahs and Little Kim. We've been able to surround it with nations that have 1,000-year memories of Chinese aggression and have very capable militaries, and they're building rapidly. So those are the things that as an intelligence officer you have to bring to the table to allow the chiefs to make the recommendations that they make to the president.
Happy.
Yeah, one more, last one.
What keeps you up at night, and how has that changed in the past year?
What keeps you up at night and has it changed?
You know, I don't worry about America's ability and capacity. And I'm speaking out of the other side of my mouth right now when I said because we are woefully underarmed in this country. However, what we have is better than anybody else has in this world, and it's being seen every day on CNN and Fox News and BBC around the world. And don't think for a second that Russia's not watching this and China's trying to figure it out. How do you do these kinds of things? And of course, Little Kim is just trying to hang on and threaten people. So while our capacity is low, and we hope to build this up under this administration, and that's critical to get it started because it's going to take another decade to get shipyards going and capacity in there and arms replenished. But I'll tell you what, we have the ability to be able to strike anywhere we have. So I don't worry about that. What I worry about is I worry about the aberrant, crazy thing that could happen by some insane group of people, and they're usually, my experience is, religiously motivated, and you end up with another 9/11. It won't be flying into the new towers up in New York, but it'll be something catastrophic that happens and that triggers something that they could end up in, and now we're up to our knickers in some type of conflagration. And I'm not talking of World War III, but I'm talking about something that's going to drag our country into something. That's what worries me at night. You know what? I don't actually worry about Vladimir. I don't, because I tell you what, his days are numbered now, because he has driven that country into the toilet economically, and he's getting his flock cleaned by little drones that are being built in garages in Ukraine that are killing his forces and sinking his ships. So he's not doing very well. I don't worry about him. China worries me a little bit. The mullahs and all the crazy religious people probably worry me more than anybody else does.
I'm going to give you an esoteric answer because I agree with everything the Commandant said. What I worry about is, I mentioned Harry Truman. Harry Truman used to say that we have to keep our young people enthused about our history, enthused about the special place that the United States has in that civilizational continuum. He said, if you don't do that, you can sell everything right down to it. And that's why I think the promotion of history and civics at the earliest stage is absolutely vital. You can just sell everything else because it won't be worth it. We don't want to get in the position that the British found themselves in the 1930s, when the mighty Oxford Union held a debate, should we fight again for king and country? 1936. And it was resoundingly delivered in the negative. So that, to me, is the longest term threat, that we don't protect and elevate our institutions and our sense of self. I'll leave you with one comical note and then a serious note. after Kaiser William dismissed the great Iron Chancellor Bismarck, Bismarck agreed to have one interview. He did it with the New York Times. Actually, it was with Leonard Jerome, who was the publisher and editor. Jerome's grandson happened to be named Winston Churchill. And Bismarck looked at the interviewer. He said, "So what are your two big questions?" He said, "Well, what do you see for the coming 20th century?" "Well, the North Americans speak English," which meant that the power of the British Empire would transfer to the United States. And the second question I will answer religiously as a good Lutheran and follower of the Blessed Martin. I've come to the conclusion that the Almighty does three things. He protects fools, drunkards, and the United States of America.
And Marines.
Yeah, that's right. And so let me finish on a more sublime note. General Powell. General Powell always said that the American soldier, generic, I'm with Marines, I'll say that generic, and he would have to.
You're forgiven this time.
Yes, sir. We'll just blame him.
Right.
He said the American soldier has done more for the peace of the world than all the UN agencies combined, all the self-serving celebrity telethons, and pious pundits from the university. And the only thing he ever asked is for a place to be buried. We've got to keep people enthused so that they fulfill that legacy. And that's the one thing that worries.
I can't leave this without making this comment. And I think it's safe in this room, otherwise you wouldn't be here for this luncheon among all your friends. But it's important to understand why we're doing what we're doing in Iran right now. And people question that. They wonder, why are we there? Why is this necessary now? Is this something that had to be done right now? And I just want to run this out. 47 years of toleration of the world's greatest purveyor of terrorism around the world. 47 years. 8 U.S. presidents. 4 of them Democrats, 4 of them Republicans. To include Ronald Reagan, the hero of the Republican Party. 4 and 4. And kicked this can down the road. And when we discovered that they had 900,000 pounds of enriched uranium to level 6, and they're going to do just exactly what the secretary said. And when you say this enough times, you say you're going to kill me enough times, it's time to believe it. It was time to do something, because we couldn't wait again. Israel couldn't wait again, and we couldn't wait again. So it's 47 years of this. I could run down the list of things, everything from the Beirut bombing in '83, the Khobar Towers in '96, all the terrorism things, in 2003 and 4 when I was in Iran, Iraq, and the Iranian forces were coming in with their militias, and they were training the insurgents against us. They brought in the explosively formed penetrator in 2003, which went right through 3-inch armor, and they introduced the roadside bombs. It's time. It's time to do this, and there's no better time. Whether you like President Trump's bravado or not, he's not going to kick the can down the road. And thank God we've got him in a leadership position that's not going to allow this to happen. Thank you very much.
It's time. The general's right. It is time to finish this. Just as a point of personal prerogative, I was a youngster at Fort Bragg when the Shah fell. The colonel who lived across the street from us, he just happened to be in Tehran on 2 weeks TDY at the embassy in the first week of November of 1979. He became a guest of the Ayatollah for the next 400 days. The colonel who lived 2 houses down from us, for those of you who follow the history of Special Forces, was a fellow named Charles Beckwith, founder of the Delta Teams, commander of the ill-fated Desert One rescue operation. And when my father was artillery commander of 82nd, one of his collateral duties was to go to Beirut. He was the Army member, senior Army member of the team, to look at what had happened to those 230 Marines and sailors at the hands of the mullahs. They've killed thousands of us. They tell us they want to do it every day. And this is the time, as General Keane said yesterday, finish it. Finish it, and we will be out of it.
Two gentlemen are going to hang around for a few more minutes if you want to say a personal thanks to them. We couldn't have scripted a better discussion, so thank you both so much for this.